The first time humanity set foot on Phaedrus 9, the planet seemed like a perfect candidate for colonization. Nestled in the outer rim of the Cygnus constellation, the world was lush with towering forests, freshwater lakes, and an atmosphere rich in oxygen. Initial probes showed no signs of sentient life and only traces of small wildlife, and within months, the first wave of settlers had set up camp, men and women eager to tame this untamed paradise. But Phaedrus 9 harbored secrets, buried in the deepest shadows of its jungles. The true rulers of the planet did not announce themselves immediately. They did not tear through the camp or challenge humanity with fire and roar. Instead, they watched from the canopy, their cold, intelligent eyes measuring the invaders. Apex predators evolved to dominate, to survive at any cost. It was on the first night of the blood moon that they attacked. The dense canopy of Phaedrus 9 shimmered with the dull red glow of the blood moon, casting eerie shadows across the colony outpost. Commander Talon Crewe, veteran explorer, leaned against the armrest of his makeshift chair in the observation tower, gazing out over the sprawling jungle. His fingers absently traced the edge of his pulse rifle, a habit he'd developed over the years. Something didn't feel right tonight, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He flipped open his comm link. Any readings from the southern perimeter? Negative. Commander, came the voice of Lieutenant Mel O'Hara from the surveillance hub. No movement for hours. It's quiet. Too quiet. Talon grunted, watching the trees sway in the distant breeze. The blood moon was an astronomical anomaly that occurred once every Phaedrian year. It painted the sky in ominous shades of red, stirring up local wildlife. Usually the colonists stayed indoors during the event, but tonight the air buzzed with an unnatural tension. Keep an eye on it, Talon ordered, closing the comm. He pulled his night vision goggles from his belt and placed them over his eyes, scanning the jungle's edge. Movement. Talon tensed, narrowing his gaze on the distant tree line. He couldn't quite see it, only the faintest flicker of shadow shifting unnaturally between the trees. Mel, focus the southern cameras on Sector 8. I thought I saw something. A crackle over the comm. Already on it, sir. Scanning now. Talon's hand tightened on the grip of his rifle. The jungle had always been alive with sounds, chirps, growls, and the steady hum of alien insects. But tonight, the silence felt oppressive. Commander Mel's voice came again, this time a little more urgent. I'm picking up something. It's big. The hair on Talon's neck prickled. How big? I don't know, sir, but it's moving fast. He didn't need to hear more. Sound the alarm. The klaxons blared through the outpost, sharp and shrill, as red lights flashed across the compound. Talon bolted down from the observation tower, his pulse rifle locked and ready, as soldiers and colonists scrambled into defensive positions. Report, Talon barked as he reached the command center, where Lieutenant Mel O'Hara sat glued to the screen, her face pale in the dim red glow. Multiple contacts, sir. Moving from the south and the west. Too fast for large animals, but they're big. And coordinated. The blood drained from Talon's face. Are we talking wildlife or... Before he could finish, a scream echoed from the outer perimeter, followed by the rapid-fire bursts of pulse rifles. The command center screen flickered as cameras switched to night vision, showing dark, hulking shapes darting through the trees, too fast to focus on. Jesus, Mel whispered. What the hell are those things? Talon watched in horror as the shapes breached the perimeter fence with terrifying ease, tearing through reinforced steel like it was paper. He saw the glint of something in the moonlight claws, long and sharp. One of the creatures, a mass of sinewy muscle and sleek, black carapace, slammed into the nearest soldier, ripping him apart with a sickening crack before vanishing back into the shadows. Get the civilians underground, now, Talon shouted, grabbing the comm. All units, fall back to the central hub. Engage with extreme caution. As soldiers opened fire, the creatures responded with terrifying speed. They moved as if anticipating every human movement, dodging pulses of light and plasma with animalistic grace. Talon could see more clearly now, bipedal, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and a predatory stance that reminded him of Earth's large cats. But their faces. There was something alien in their eyes. Intelligence. These weren't just animals. They were hunters. By the time Talon reached the underground bunker, chaos had fully erupted above. The sound of gunfire, screams, and the eerie clicking of the creatures echoed through the compound as the survivors scrambled to seal themselves inside. Lock it down, Talon barked as he shoved Mel inside. Engineers worked frantically to reinforce the heavy metal doors, welding them shut in case the creatures broke through. Talon, Mel gasped, pulling him aside. I've been analyzing the movement patterns. These things, they're not just attacking at random. They're pushing us into a specific area, like they're hurting us. Talon's eyes narrowed. You're saying they have a plan? Mel nodded. It's not just an attack, they're hunting. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. These weren't just predators, they were strategists. Phaedrus 9 had never been humanity's for the taking. The planet had a natural order, and they had just stepped into the territory of an apex predator unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Talon glanced around at the terrified faces of the survivors, each one clinging to the fragile hope that the bunker would hold. He wasn't so sure. He had faced death before seeing the kind of feral intelligence that could not be reasoned with. These creatures were at the top of the food chain for a reason. How do we fight them? Mel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Talon tightened his grip on his rifle. We don't. Not on their terms. Hours passed in a tense, suffocating silence. The sounds of the attack faded, replaced by the occasional distant click or screech as the creatures prowled the outpost above. Talon knew they were biding their time. The bunker wouldn't hold forever. Commander, one of the engineers called, running up to him with a datapad. We've rigged the outpost's power core. If we overload it, we can trigger a controlled explosion. It might buy us enough time to escape. Talon nodded grimly. Do it. Get everyone ready to move. As the team worked on the plan, Talon pulled Mel aside. I need you to figure out their communication. They're too coordinated to be working purely on instinct. Mel blinked, confused. You want me to? Analyze the clicking sounds, their patterns. Maybe they're using sonar or some kind of signal we can disrupt. Mel hesitated but then nodded, heading back to her console. As Talon prepared for the inevitable escape, a deep rumble echoed from above, followed by the metallic screech of the bunker's outer door being pried open. Therein someone shouted, panic rippling through the bunker. Talon raised his rifle, heart pounding. Everyone to the escape tunnels now. The creatures poured in like a flood, black shadows in the dim light, their claws glinting as they tore through the remaining soldiers. Talon fired, hitting one square in the chest, but it barely slowed. These things were fast, deadly, and terrifyingly resilient. Go, Talon shouted, covering the retreat as civilians scrambled into the tunnels. Just as one of the creatures leaped toward him, Mel's voice rang out over the comm. I did it. I cracked their signal. Talon ducked as the creature's claws missed him by inches. What do you mean? They use low-frequency sound waves to coordinate their movements. If we can disrupt it. Do it. Mel hit a switch, and suddenly a high-pitched tone echoed through the bunker. The creatures staggered, their movements disoriented for the first time. Talon didn't waste a second, firing at the confused predators as the survivors fled deeper into the tunnels. Is that going to keep them off us? Someone asked as they ran. Mel shook her head. It'll only disorient them for a while. But it might just give us the time we need. The survivors made it to the escape tunnels just as the power core detonated, sending a shockwave through the compound. Talon felt the rumble beneath his feet, the heat of the blast warming the walls as they hurried through the narrow passageways. They emerged into the open air on the far side of the outpost, the jungle thick and foreboding before them. The blood moon still hung heavy in the sky, casting an eerie red glow over everything. Talon knew the creatures wouldn't be far behind. We keep moving, he ordered. Head for the evac point. The survivors ran, their feet pounding the damp earth as the sounds of the jungle echoed around them. But Talon could feel it, the presence of the predators, watching, waiting. Even disoriented, they were still hunters. Commander, Mel whispered as she jogged beside him, even if we make it to the evac point, they're going to follow us. Talon nodded grimly. Then we make our stand there. This is their world, but tonight, we're not prey. As they neared the clearing, the first of the creatures appeared in the distance, its glowing eyes fixed on the fleeing humans. Talon raised his rifle, took a deep breath, and aimed. The final battle had begun. Talon fired the first shot, hitting the creature directly between its glowing, predatory eyes. It staggered, letting out a high-pitched shriek that reverberated through the jungle, but the thing barely slowed. Behind it, More of the sleek, black predators emerged from the shadows, their sinewy bodies rippling under the blood-red moon. "Keep moving," Talon barked as the group sprinted for the evac point. The creatures charged with unnatural speed, their movements fluid and eerily synchronized, like a pack of wolves hunting in perfect harmony. The survivors, what was left of them, ran through the thick undergrowth, dodging between massive alien trees, their leaves a deep indigo and bristling with needle-like thorns. Behind them, the creatures closed in, their razor-sharp claws glinting under the crimson light. Talon led the group, his heart pounding, every instinct on edge. He could hear the creatures moving just out of sight, their clicking sounds blending into the natural cacophony of the jungle. He knew it wasn't a question of if they would strike, but when. They were hurting them again. Commander, Mel shouted, running beside him, breathless. "We're close. Evac point is less than a kilometer out." Talon nodded, his mind racing. The evac point was an open clearing on the other side of a river. If they could reach it, there was a chance they could hold out long enough for a dropship to arrive. But the creatures wouldn't stop. They'd keep coming, faster, deadlier, until every last human was dead. Talon glanced over his shoulder. One of the creatures was closer now, running on all fours, its elongated arms and legs propelling it through the dense foliage. Its eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment Talon saw something there, something more than just primal hunger. These things were toying with them. He fired another shot, but the creature dodged, leaping into the trees and disappearing into the canopy. They were close. Too close. The jungle broke suddenly into an open field, a clearing that stretched toward the riverbank. In the center stood the evac beacon, a tall metallic pole pulsing with a soft blue light, signaling their position to any nearby ships. It was a beacon of hope in the middle of this nightmare. "Go, go. Get to the beacon," Talon shouted, urging the survivors forward. As they ran across the clearing, the creatures broke from the tree line, their black, sleek bodies almost invisible against the dark jungle. Talon's pulse rifle hummed as he fired shot after shot, his hands steady despite the terror clenching his gut. One of the creatures leapt from the shadows, tackling a soldier to the ground with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed as the creature tore into him with its claws. Another lunged at a young woman near the back of the group, but before it could strike, Mel fired her sidearm, hitting it in the shoulder. The beast screeched and recoiled, but not before raking its claws across the woman's leg. "Keep moving," Talon ordered, grabbing Mel by the arm and pulling her toward the beacon. They reached the riverbank, the wide, flowing water offering a brief moment of safety. Talon scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of a dropship, but the sky remained empty. The creatures paused at the edge of the clearing, their glowing eyes reflecting the light of the blood moon as they studied the humans from afar. Their waiting, Mel panted, clutching her rifle with shaking hands. Talon nodded grimly. "They're smarter than we thought. They're waiting for the right moment to strike." He activated his comm link. "Evac beacon active. We need immediate extraction, priority 1. Repeat, immediate extraction." The radio crackled, but there was no response. The silence pressed in, the weight of their situation sinking into Talon's bones. "They're going to tear us apart," one of the engineers whispered, his voice trembling. "There's no way out." Talon turned, his jaw clenched. "There's always a way out. We just need to hold them off until Evac arrives." Mel looked up at the blood moon, her face pale. "They've been living here for centuries, evolving to survive. We've only been here for months. We're the intruders, and they know this planet better than we ever will." Talon's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then we'll have to beat them on their terms." The creatures circled the clearing, their black carapaces blending into the shadows. They moved with calculated precision, always staying just out of range. Talon could feel it like a chess game where the opponent was always 3 steps ahead. These things were not only apex predators, they were tactical hunters, patient and calculating. Mel, Talon called, crouching beside her near the beacon. "You said they're communicating with each other, right?" She nodded, sweat dripping down her face. "Yeah, it's like a low-frequency sonar. They use it to coordinate their movements like a pack." Talon's mind raced. "Is there any way we can disrupt that signal? Scramble it, maybe?" Mel frowned, glancing down at the datapad she'd been carrying. "I could try. I might be able to rig something with the evac beacon's frequency array. But it'll take time." Talon glanced at the tree line. The creatures were getting restless, their clicking sounds growing louder as they prepared for the next assault. Time was something they didn't have. "Do it," Talon said firmly. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." Mel nodded, her fingers flying over the datapad as she began working on the makeshift frequency jammer. Talon turned back to the group, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of the survivors. "We've got one shot at this," he said. "We hold the line here, at the river. If they get through, it's over. Stay sharp, stay together, and don't let them separate you." The remaining soldiers and colonists nodded, fear in their eyes but determination etched into their faces. They'd come too far to die now. The first creature broke from the tree line, charging across the clearing with terrifying speed. Talon fired, hitting it in the chest, but the thing barely flinched. More followed, their claws tearing into the earth as they rushed the humans. "Open fire," Talon shouted, and the night exploded with the sound of pulse rifles and plasma bursts. The creatures were relentless, moving with inhuman agility, dodging and weaving through the hail of gunfire. One of them leaped onto a soldier, ripping through his armor like it was paper. Another creature barreled into the group, knocking 2 colonists to the ground, its jaws snapping at their throats. Talon aimed carefully, firing at the creature's exposed flank, and it fell with a screech, its black blood staining the earth. But for every one they killed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "Mel, how's that jammer coming?" Talon shouted over the chaos. Almost there, she yelled back, her hands a blur as she wired the datapad into the beacon's array. Just a few more seconds. A creature lunged at Talon from the side, and he barely had time to react. Its claws raked across his arm, cutting deep into his flesh. He gritted his teeth against the pain, firing point blank into its chest. The thing collapsed, twitching as it died. "Talon," Mel screamed. "It's done." She hit the switch, and a high-pitched frequency pulsed through the air. The creatures screeched, staggering as the signal scrambled their communication. For the first time, their movements became erratic, disorganized. Talon took advantage of the confusion, rallying the survivors. "Push them back. Now's our chance." The humans fought with renewed vigor, driving the disoriented creatures back toward the tree line. One by one, the predators fell, their coordination shattered by the disrupted signal. Talon fired his last shot, taking down the final creature as it tried to retreat into the jungle. The clearing fell silent, save for the distant hum of the evac beacon. "We did it," Mel whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "We beat them." Talon glanced up at the blood moon, still hanging ominously in the sky. For now. Hours later, the evac dropship arrived, its bright floodlights cutting through the darkness. Talon stood at the river's edge, his arm bandaged but still throbbing with pain. The survivors filed onto the ship, their faces pale and haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. As the last of the colonists boarded, Mel approached Talon, her eyes tired but determined. "We should report this to the Federation. They need to know what's out here." Talon nodded, staring out at the jungle. "They'll send more people. They'll want to study them." "They'll be back for us," Mel said softly. Talon looked up at the blood moon, its crimson light casting long shadows over the land. He knew she was right. The creatures of Phaedrus 9 weren't just apex predators, they were survivors, just like the humans. And one day they would come hunting again. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them off the surface of the planet. As they ascended into the dark sky, Talon couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving something unfinished, that the creatures were still watching, waiting. Phaedrus 9 was not humanity's world. It belonged to the hunters. And in the end, every predator finds its prey.